Evan McLaughlin drove his car into the driveway. He took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked towards his cousin's house. He didn't have to ring the doorbell because James had already opened it and invited him in. Beth was waiting for him in the living room. She kissed him on the cheek and invited him to sit down. Evan was married to Nancy, and they were both 38 years old. They had a son, John, who celebrated his 12th birthday a couple of weeks ago. Evan and James' fathers were brothers, so they both had the same last name. James and his young wife Elizabeth had twins Ian and Sean, aged 10. Beth brought Evan a cup of coffee, black without sugar. "You know my taste, Beth. Where are the twins?" "They're spending the day at a friend's house," Beth answered and sat down next to her husband. Evan turned to James. "Okay, brother, what's going on? You called me to come alone. What is so important that we need to discuss it without Nancy?" James looked at Beth and then back at Evan. "What I am going to tell you, ask you, must remain between the three of us. No one else, I repeat, no one else should know about this." "Does this concern my family? Am I in trouble?" Evan frowned. "Not you, this concerns me. Promise me, Evan, that you won't tell anyone." James begged. "We're like brothers, James. I have no choice but to keep your secret." James took a deep breath. Beth squeezed his hand. "I have health issues." James almost cried. "What? What problems? You're not dying, are you? You always took care of your health." "The thing is," James looked down at the floor, "I've become impotent." "What?" Evan almost spilled his coffee. "It started 5 years ago when I had problems with anxiety. I thought it was stressful as I was expanding my business with more loans and employees. I didn't see a doctor until 3 years later when Beth kept insisting on it. Perhaps it was my ego or pride to keep my problem to myself. Meanwhile, Beth suffered." "What has the doctor advised or prescribed over the past 2 years?" Evan asked. "I took several tests, took medications, all kinds of pills to increase sex drive, but nothing worked. The doctor said I should have seen him the first time the problem arose. I've waited too long." Tears streamed down James' face. "The doctor said the problem might be in my head. I don't know, Evan, I really don't know." "Sorry, James. Did you see another doctor? Looking for a second opinion?" "There were only 4 doctors, and they all said the same thing." "What can I do for you, James? Please tell me." "Beth is 32 and still young. I don't want her to suffer anymore. I could divorce her and let her remarry, but I don't want my sons to grow up in a broken home. They are only 10. James started crying. Evan walked up to James and hugged him. Beth joined them. "Everything will be fine," Beth reassured her husband. "Beth and I talked about it." James wiped away his tears. "At first I thought she could go out once or twice a month, meet people, mostly strangers, and be very careful. But I know that in a couple of months, rumors about her activities will spread. She will be considered girl-lung behavior and me a cuckold or a weakling. I don't want my sons to hear this about their mom. It will affect them, and I'm afraid they will be bullied at school. Then I thought about her taking a permanent lover. The question was whether it would be a single or married man. The guy shouldn't have any future expectations with Beth. He needs to know that this is only sex. She needs someone who will treat her tenderly and caringly, and not like a doormat. Someone who will understand her and our situation. Someone she knows and who knows her, who loves her, and who will protect her if necessary. And most importantly, someone she will accept." James turned to Beth. She nodded to him. "We ask you, Evan, to be that man." "What?" Evan winced. "You want me to cheat on Nancy?" "Evan, we respect your decision," Beth said. "Don't think we want to ruin your marriage with Nancy. She is a good woman, a good wife, and a good mother. We know how dear she is to you. She has always been like an older sister to me. Her advice was always very helpful. We don't want to steal you from her. James and I discussed this for months. You are the only one who fits our ideal man. Don't think it's easy for me to just go out and sleep with anyone, including you. I love James, and the voice in my head will always remind me that I'm cheating on him. But I am a woman, and I have needs and desires. I understand, Evan said calmly. Is there another way to deal with this problem? I mean using toys and other devices. We tried it in the beginning, James replied. It didn't work, it's artificial. I don't know, I really don't know. Evan shook his head. We understand that we place a great responsibility on you, but always remember that if you refuse, our relationship will remain the same as if this conversation had never happened. Our children will continue to meet and spend time together. 3 brothers, as they usually call themselves. Beth smiled. Don't worry, brother. James patted Evan on the shoulder. Beth and I will look for someone else if you decide you don't want to do this. Evan stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. He stood motionless. Give me a couple of days. Let me think, and I will give you the answer, he said without turning around, and walked towards his car. When Evan returned home, Nancy was preparing dinner. Did you find what you needed at the hardware store, honey? She asked. No, the drill is over. Where is John? He is in his room. Come here, Neil. Evan unzipped his pants. But dear, what if John comes in? We will hear his footsteps. Nancy did as he said. I'll go wash and rest. Let me know when dinner is ready. Evan walked up the stairs to his bedroom. A couple of days later, Evan locked himself in his car and made a phone call. Hey, James, can you talk? Let me go to the office, wait. Pause. Okay, Evan, I hope you bring good news. Yes, this is really good news, but there are some conditions. I'm listening to. I would like a written statement, signed by both of you, detailing your situation, your decisions, and that you agree with this sex-only relationship. Basically everything you told me last time. I need this to protect myself if Nancy somehow finds out about this and sues me for intentional treason. I understand, Evan. You will receive your signed statement. There will be no audio or video recordings. You will never be there for us. I'm against those husbands who hide in the closet to watch their wives have sex with other men, or those who ask for full details after their wives return home. That was not my intention, Evan. I just wanted to be honest from the beginning. The first few times we'll meet at a motel. We can then arrange meetings at your home. For the simple reason that in the beginning, I want Beth to be away from everything. Okay, anything else? These are my main concerns. I'm free this Saturday afternoon. I'll let you know which motel we'll meet at. You bring Beth, give me the statement, and leave. I'll take her home myself later. It suits me. I'll tell Beth. On Saturday afternoon, James pulled into the Best Western Motel parking lot and parked next to Evan's car. Evan got out, locked his car, and got into the back seat of James' Lexus. Beth handed him the envelope. He read the document and nodded. I have already booked a room. Are you ready? Evan asked. Beth turned to James. Go, he whispered. Evan and Beth got out of the car and headed towards the motel entrance. James watched them until they disappeared behind the automatic door. Oh my God, why me? What sins have I committed? James started crying. I know, he was sobbing. As soon as they entered the room, Beth went to the window and closed the curtain. Evan walked up behind her and pulled her close to him. Without words, they began to undress each other. Evan picked her up and carried her to the bed. 5 years later, Evan sat in his home office and contemplated his life. Over the past 5 years, he had sex with Beth with James's approval. They were so careful that no one knew about it. At first, it was twice a month in a motel, and each time in a new one. Then it was at James and Beth's house. Since Beth was a stay-at-home mom, Evan would come over during the day when the twins were at school, and they would do it in the spare bedroom. After a few months, this started happening twice a week. Then it got to the point where they did it whenever they wanted. There was a time when Evan met with Beth every day during lunch. In the beginning, Beth told James every time she saw Evan, but after a year, she stopped. The two families continued to meet frequently. At each meeting, Evan and Beth behaved as usual. The three boys were best friends. Evan always told them that they had the same last name, the same blood, and that made them brothers. Nancy has gained weight. Evan had her 3 to 4 times a week. One day she complained about their sexual relationship. She wanted more. The next day he bought her sex toys. As usual, when they were home alone, he treated her the way he wanted. He always carried a condom in his pocket. As she sat on the couch talking to her mom on the phone, he walked over, lifted her skirt, and removed her panties. He quietly ordered her to continue the conversation and not hang up. He had her with such force that Nancy had to say goodbye and hang up. John was in his last year of school. The next year he was supposed to go to college. Evan was going to max out the mortgage on the house and take out a loan to pay for John's full education. 18 years already, he thought. Time flies. He was going to visit Beth that Saturday afternoon. James was going to take the twins to their soccer practice. As usual, he waited in his car on the street, 100 meters away. As James drove away, Evan parked in the driveway. The twins weren't supposed to see him or his car. He smiled and stroked his penis. He couldn't wait to be in bed with Beth again. James started the engine. He was taking his sons to soccer practice, and then, as usual, he was going to take them to ice cream. The kids loved eating the ice after sweating heavily on the field. When he returned 2 hours later, Ewan would be gone. Beth will be in a fine mood. She laughed and joked with the children. She hummed as she prepared dinner. As he pulled out onto the main road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw Ewan's car heading towards his house. "Dad, I forgot my shin guards," Ian exclaimed after 10 minutes of driving. James immediately turned around. "Where do you keep them?" James asked Ian. "They're in a plastic bag under my bed." James parked 50 meters from his house. He turned to the twins. "Stay here, I'll go and get them." "Why are you stopping here?" Sean asked. "It's better here," James replied, without looking at the children. "Don't move, I'll be right back." James quietly entered his house. He knew that one of the conditions was that he should not be present during their sex. Without a sound, he walked up the stairs and out into the hallway, past the bedroom and into Ian's room. He heard Beth giggle. Returning with a plastic bag, he stopped in front of the closed door of the guest bedroom. He couldn't believe his ears. In shock, he tiptoed to the door and tried to eavesdrop on Beth and Ewan's conversation. "Ewan, what did you say?" "Beth, my biological clock is ticking. I would like to give the twins a brother or sister." "Ewan, do you think this is the right thing to do?" "Beth, yes, honey. I'll explain this to James 2 or 3 months after I get pregnant. He'll have to accept it. He won't have a choice. I stopped taking birth control. I'm fertile now. Come and impregnate your wife." James stood motionless. Tears streamed down his face. He found himself in a hopeless situation and did not know what to do. He heard Beth moan, "Ewan, I, your only husband, will give you the child you want. Your wish is my command, darling. Ewan, tomorrow you'll go shopping, but you'll meet me at the motel instead." James couldn't listen anymore. He left like a broken man. He wiped away his tears and took a deep breath. He didn't want the twins to read the emotion on his face. He was driving slowly, and his thoughts were on something else. On the football field, he sat on the bench and watched his sons play. He thought about his life, his youth, his first meeting with Beth, his mistakes, the birth of twins, and his impotence. He exclaimed. He was still young, and he would have to bear his burden until he died. He knew he'd lost Beth the day they decided to have a sexual-only relationship with Ewan, but he never expected to be stabbed in the back. "There's a good chance she's already pregnant," he told himself. "How can the mother of my children do this to me?" He knew his hands were tied by the agreement he had signed. He took his mobile phone and dialed the house number. They called several times until Beth picked up. "Yes, James," Beth said, out of breath. "Please tell Ewan to stay. I have something important to discuss." James asked in a serious voice. "Something. Is there a problem, James?" He heard the worry in Beth's voice. "I need to clear something up." Okay, see you after the match. When James entered his house, he found Beth and Ewan sitting on the sofa, talking leisurely. Uncle Ewan. The twins ran up to Ewan. Hello, children. How was your training today? Wonderful. Both answered at the same time. Is John with you? No, I was just passing by and decided to stop by and say hello. Okay, kids, go take a shower. James ordered twins. They both ran up the stairs. James poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat down opposite Beth and Ewan. He looked his wife in the eye and took a sip of the drink. The two lovers didn't say a word and waited for James to start talking. I'm divorcing you, Beth. Beth was shocked at first and turned to Ewan and smiled. Ewan smiled back. I agree with your decision, James. Beth said, It will be hard for the twins at first, but eventually they will understand and they will have to live with it. It will be based on irreconcilable differences. You will keep your house and car, which are not subject to a mortgage. I will sell my business. I will set up a trust fund for their educational expenses. You will receive child support until they are 18 and nothing more. Then you can sell this house and buy a small 2-room apartment, invest the remaining money and live on the income. If you're going to live the same lifestyle, it won't be that much. I advise you to look for a job. What are you going to do? I will travel the world with a backpack, doing small jobs here and there. Then, in a couple of years, I'll settle down somewhere in South America where it's cheap to live and retire. Twins, they'll be going to college in 3 years anyway. They'll be 2 grown boys by then, and they'll probably understand, but I'll always keep in touch with them through Skype and other social media. It's a surprise. Beth looked at Ewan. He nodded to her. Okay, I accept the deal. Okay, next week I will meet with a lawyer and start looking for a buyer for my business. James stood up and walked towards the stairs, then turned to the two of them. I want nothing to do with a bastard growing in your womb. He continued on his way to the bedroom. He stopped on the stairs and turned to Beth. I will stay in this house until the divorce is official, and until then you will sleep in the extra bedroom. Ewan and Beth sat in shock, then he shrugged. Better late than never. He pulled Beth close and kissed her deeply, then said goodbye. As stated, a week later Beth was served with the papers and signed the divorce papers. James sat down with the twins and explained that he was going to leave. He hid the real reason and only told them that he and his mother separated, and the best thing was a divorce. They didn't like it very much and tried to convince their parents to stay together and sort things out. One evening at the dinner table, the twins pleaded with their parents. James turned to them. Uncle Ewan will be here to keep an eye on you. I'm sure he will come here regularly to visit you. You both won't feel alone. Nancy was stunned when Ewan told her about James' divorce. They are a model couple. She said, Beth is the love of his life, and he would do anything for her. I still don't believe they are getting a divorce. I know he would do anything for her. Ewan emphasized, but in life, things happen. Can we intervene and try to reconcile them? I can meet with James and try to convince him. You're not doing anything, Ewan said angrily. This is their problem and their question. They will have to deal with this alone. We're not going to do anything. You understand? Yes, but... No buts. I don't want you to have any contact with them in my absence. No calls to Beth or James. Understood? Nancy nodded. What about twins? They are the apple of his eyes. They will get through this, and then John and I will be here for them. They are also my sons. John is their brother, and as I always say, they have the same last name, the same blood, and they are brothers. Evan, you are their uncle. They need their father. After James leaves, I will be the only one they have to relate to, and I will never let them down. Do you think Beth has a lover? I don't know, and you shouldn't pry into other people's affairs. Evan sat down on the couch and unzipped his pants. John will be back in half an hour. Come and kneel. 3 months later, The divorce was finalized and the business was sold. Evan and his family were at James' house when he left. Beth, with her growing belly, wore a loose dress to hide her pregnancy from Nancy. The twins cried and hugged their father, who did not want to let him go. Beth was emotional, but there were no tears. John joined the twins and hugged his uncle. Nancy cried too and ran into Evan's arms. James hugged Beth. "I'm sorry," she whispered in his ear. "I did all this for you because I loved you," James whispered back. James then turned to Nancy and hugged her. He looked into her eyes and said, "Thank you." Evan and James shook hands. "You will take care of my family and make sure that they do not lack anything." "I'll do it," Evan replied. James, with tears in his eyes, walked towards the taxi that was waiting. He sat inside and waved goodbye. They watched as the taxi turned into the street and drove away. Over the next few weeks, Evan and his family visited Beth regularly, even staying overnight on weekends. Nancy found out about Beth's pregnancy. Evan asked her not to talk about it or ask questions. Evan continued to meet with Beth at lunchtime on weekdays. On Saturdays, both families accompanied the twins to their soccer practices. When Beth was 7 months pregnant, her parents moved in with her. Evan still came, but sex was out of the question. On several occasions, he took the twins to his home, and they went out with John to have fun. It could be fishing, swimming, bowling, or watching a movie. Gradually, the relationship between the twins and Evan began to resemble a father-son relationship. 2 months later, Beth gave birth to a beautiful and healthy baby girl, Sinead McLaughlin. Evan was the happiest man in the world. He was the first to rush to the hospital. He kissed Beth and asked her to be patient. The twins and John were excited. Nancy was a little skeptical. Many questions flashed through her mind, but she didn't ask any. After Beth and the baby returned home, Evan looked for any excuse to visit them. He stayed with Sinead for hours sometimes. At the end of August, John went to college and stayed on campus. 2 weeks later, after dinner, Evan and Nancy were at home when the doorbell rang. "This is for you, Nancy," Evan said to a puzzled Nancy. She went to the door, and when she opened it, she saw a man in a suit standing on the porch. "Are you Mrs. Nancy McLaughlin?" asked the man. "Yes, I'm Nancy McLaughlin," answered a puzzled Nancy. "You have a summons." The man handed her a manila envelope and left. Nancy turned to Evan. "It's a joke." She almost lost consciousness. She leaned against the wall. "I'm divorcing you, Nancy." "You can't be serious, Evan. Is there someone else?" Evan avoided her question. "This is what I've wanted to do for 18 years. But because of John, I waited. I didn't want him to grow up in a broken family." "But why, Evan? Didn't you love me any more after John was born?" "I would say 8 months after he was born. During this period, I became so attached to him that I did not want to share him with anyone. I didn't want to spend every other weekend with him. I didn't want him to call anyone else daddy. I wanted to watch him grow and be close to him. I wanted to give him his first razor and teach him how to shave and a lot of other things." Nancy frowned. She was still confused. "I know, Nancy. I found out 8 months after he was born." "No, it cannot be." Nancy's eyes suddenly widened, and she simply slid to the floor. "You knew?" "Yes. I stopped loving you at that very moment. I won't go into detail, but I found out and installed audio and video recording devices in our house. I know that the affair began when you were 8 months pregnant. There's tons of material about you too that I've secretly saved. But when it was over, I became the most faithful wife." Nancy was crying. "I did everything possible to save our marriage and family. I gave you everything you wanted. I agreed to all your fantasies. I accepted the role of a submissive wife, just to please you and make our relationship work." "Fantasy? Can you tell me when was the last time we made love?" "We had sex regularly and—" "You're right," Evan interrupted her. "We had sex. I stopped making love to you 18 years ago, and since then I've had you like a cheap whore. I treated you like a bitch. Did you notice that I always used a condom? I didn't trust you anymore and didn't know if you were still cheating with other men. You could bring home illnesses, and every time I had you, I humiliated you. Did you hate me that much? You have no idea. Tell me how your romance ended." Nancy didn't answer, she just cried. "Tell me, bitch," Evan shouted. "We decided to call it a day." Nancy was sobbing. "You said we, I'm guessing you both sat down and decided to end this." Nancy nodded. "Liar," Evan shouted. "It was Friday lunchtime at the motel. This was your last meeting. He told you that he wouldn't see you anymore because his wife was pregnant. What did you answer?" Nancy cried even louder. "You insisted that he go out with you from time to time because you fell in love with sex with him. Your own words, bitch. And he still left you to be faithful to his wife." "I'm sorry, please forgive me, Evan. It was a mistake that I regret. 18 years have passed. Let's forget about this and work on our future together. Please, Evan." "I can't, for the simple reason that I don't love you anymore." "What will you tell John?" "The truth is how you cheated when he was in your womb. Don't worry, I won't tell him with whom exactly." "Please, Evan, don't. I don't want to be the bad guy. I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences. Don't expect anything from the house, as I have already maxed out the mortgage to pay for John's college. We will split our savings in half. There will be no alimony since we both work. You leave your car, and I will leave mine. And please don't try to contest the divorce. You probably don't want all the recordings to become public. I'm moving out right now, and I'll contact the real estate agent tomorrow." Evan left the crying Nancy and went to his room to pack 2 suitcases. An hour later, he left the house and moved into a furnished apartment, paid for a month in advance, where he intended to stay until the divorce was final. He called Beth to keep her updated. He told her that they needed to be very careful that Nancy would not have any reason to challenge the divorce. Nancy moved in with her parents. John was a little shocked, but Evan advised him to focus on his studies rather than family matters. He also told him that he would always be there for him. Nancy's parents tried their best to reconcile the couple, but Evan was adamant. 3 months later, the divorce was official. Evan immediately moved in with Beth. The twins were a little confused at first. Then Evan and Beth sat down with them and, without going into detail, explained that they were in love, and this was the best decision. The twins kept in touch with James, who was not surprised by Evan's divorce and moving in with Beth, but he felt sorry for Nancy. 6 months later, Evan and Beth tied the knot. They held a small ceremony to which only close relatives were invited. Nancy was not invited. 2 years later, while the twins were in college, tragedy struck. James was in the Philippines, hiking in the mountains with a group of tourists when they were hit by a hurricane, or typhoon as the locals call it. They hurried down to the village at the foot of the mountain, but 3 did not make it, and James was among them. His body was repatriated. 2 weeks after the funeral, Evan, Beth, and her family gathered at James's lawyer's office for the reading of his will. The couple were puzzled to see Nancy come and sit in the corner. The lawyer read a letter from James, which was brief and to the point. The twins got 80% of what he left, and Nancy got the rest. The words he used for Nancy were, "for the inconvenience." The following Saturday, Evan and Beth were home alone. Sinead was visiting her grandparents. They decided to spend the entire weekend in bed. The doorbell rang and both cursed. Evan went to open the door, and it was Nancy. As soon as the door opened, she ran inside, to Evan's amazement. "I need answers," she screamed before Evan could open his mouth. "What do you want to know?" Evan asked, and at the same time Beth came down the stairs. "It's good that you're here too." Nancy looked at Beth. "You two cheated on each other before your divorce, and who is Sinead's father? Don't try to lie to me, Evan. James is not her father. He wouldn't have divorced Beth when she was pregnant, and he didn't leave her a penny." "What will you do if you find out the truth?" Evan asked, walking up to Beth and putting his arm around her waist. "We moved on with our lives. I'm happy with where I am. I heard that you are in a serious relationship with a new man. He is 10 years older than you, but he is a good person. I'm sure he'll treat you well if you give him a chance. After the divorce, I cursed myself for what I did. After you got married and after James' will, I had a lot of questions. I know I'm guilty of cheating, but you weren't innocent either. Sit down, Nancy. It's a long story. Evan and Beth sat across from Nancy. Beth nodded to Evan. That day when I came home early and found James between your legs in our bed and John asleep in his crib next to you both, I wanted to rush in and kill you both. But the thought of John stopped me from becoming a murderer and going to jail because of two cheaters and losing my son at the same time. Evan took a deep breath. I started installing audio and video recording devices in our house. I listened and watched all your meetings. That's how I found out that the affair began when you were 8 months pregnant. I was relieved because I doubted John was my son. Nancy lowered her eyes to the floor. I would never do this to you. Then I decided to tell Beth what was going on. Evan continued. She had a right to know. Beth smiled at Evan and squeezed his hand. We have decided to catch you both in the act and get a divorce. By then your maternity leave had ended and you had returned to work. From one of your phone calls, we learned that you were meeting at the Best Western Motel at lunchtime. Beth and I went there and were ready to break into your room. At the last moment, I suggested that she take revenge before we carried out our plan. She agreed. I booked a room at the same motel at the same time that you were together. We didn't have wild sex. We made love, passionate love. After that, we decided to meet a couple more times before exposing you. We also decided not to have sex with our spouses during this period. We met every day in motels, at her place in James' bed, and even in our bed. On the second day, she told me that she was not on birth control and that she was fertile. Nancy's mouth dropped open in surprise, and a look of horror appeared on her face. Yes, the twins are mine. Do you remember when I always told the children, same surname, same blood, they are brothers? Evan, John, Ian, Sean, and Sinead. Do these names mean anything to you? My God, they are all yours. Yes, that is right, Evan replied proudly. James never knew. One wonderful thing happened after our week together. We fell in love. I stopped making love to you and had you like a bitch. When Beth announced that she was pregnant, James decided to end his affair with you and be a faithful husband. But it was too late because Beth had already stopped loving him. How could you? Nancy turned to Beth. He died not knowing that he was not the father of the twins. Whatever we do, Beth spoke for the first time. We did this because of your affair. If you two hadn't cheated on us, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. Tears began to stream down Nancy's face. It was a mistake. She was sobbing. I'm grateful for your mistake. Beth responded and kissed Evan. We continued to meet in secret. Evan smiled. Until 5 years later, we decided we had to make a decision. Beth shook her head at Evan. Nancy noticed this. What happened 5 years later? Nancy asked Evan. We made the decision to be together. That's all I can say. Nancy, we plan to tell the 3 boys the whole truth when the twins graduate from college. Beth stood up and walked to the door, opening it. Nancy wiped her tears and walked to the door. Sorry. We're sorry too, the couple said at the same time. Nancy walked away without looking back. Why didn't you want me to tell Nancy everything? Evan asked Beth later when they were in bed. You've already said enough for today. It would be too hard for her. You're right. She was on edge when she walked into the house. And what we did to James must remain our secret. Even children shouldn't know. We'll take this to our graves, darling. Evan pulled Beth close and kissed her. With her head resting on Evan's chest, Beth remembered the day they decided to do something with James. It was the twins' 5th birthday. The solution was simple. Mix James and anti-androgen in his food and drinks every day. Evan even flew to Bangkok, telling everyone it was a business trip to buy some illegal drugs used to make him impotent. The result was as they expected. Beth was showing her displeasure, and knowing how much James loved her, She knew that he would suggest that she take a lover to satisfy her sexually, and the rest was history. To rub salt into the wound, Evan chose a Best Western motel for their first sexual encounter and brought Beth there. "What would you call our revenge, dear?" Beth raised her head to look at Evan. "I would say revenge with a devilish twist." "Ready for another round?" he asked, knowing the answer. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.